I guess I love origin stories, so I want to know how you came to be writers. I guess this is different from just the coming out, the queer coming out story. I want the writing coming out story. Just what your trajectory was to becoming a writer and acknowledging that. And knowing that's the path you wanted to kind of walk on.
Where do you take that while I think about it?
When I was 29, I decided that God had not called me to be a priest, so I left the priesthood. And so I got in my car, and when you leave the priesthood, it's like getting a divorce and losing your job all in the same day. I got in my car, and I had a typewriter, and I wanted to be a writer, and I had always wanted to be a writer, and that was really what I thought was my true calling. And so that I became a waiter and saved money, and I didn't know how to become a writer, and I went back to school, and, well, here I am.
Okay, let me think here. I think I'll start way back, like you did. So I was 3, 4, 5 years old, and my mother got really overwhelmed when we were living in Chicago when my sister was born. So my mother was like kind of losing it, and so my Aunt May, who was a retired school teacher, took me every Wednesday to her house. So I was super spoiled because Aunt May had this cool, house, and they didn't have any children, so I was very spoiled. And she taught me how to read. And I remember we were on the second floor of her house, and she said, there was a window, and she looked out and she said, "I see you sitting here writing at a window, looking out." And I was saying this morning, we were talking about where we'd like to write. And I was describing this low ceiling room with one window. And I realized it's where she said that I was destined to write. So, it took a million years to get to that, and I still don't quite have that one window. But I remember someone told me that I was good at this thing and worked with me. And that was what kind of encouraged me early on.
I took a long, circuitous, crazy route into writing. I started off, I wrote when I was really, really young, but it wasn't a value system for me. And I think specifically like the culture that I grew up, it was like, you're going to be a lawyer, a doctor, a judge. So I didn't look at the arts as like actually a sustainable way to live. So I did, my arts were like I sang and I played trombone, I did all the music, but for extracurricular, even though I was good at it. And so then I get to Wellesley College, I promptly lose my mind a little bit while there. And then I go to acting school, which confused my parents. And then after that, I come out in the middle of the recession and you can't get acting work. And so then I started writing to process the world. And that's when my writing took off and I was like, oh no, I really like this. So yeah, it's always been there, but I didn't always know to know.
My story's not that remarkable. I think the remarkable thing is that nobody told me writing was a waste of time. So I started writing when I was, at this point, I've been calling myself a poet more than half my life. So I started writing in 9th grade. It was, my mom was like, cool, you're writing poems, you're not doing all this stuff she didn't know I was doing. So, she was down for it. So I've been a poet since I was 14, and I'm really grateful to the universe for putting nobody in my life that made me see that as something that I couldn't perceive and dream about.
Yeah, I think I was drawn to it writing at a very, very early age. Some early memories. I just remember I wrote this little poem called Nightfall that somehow got in the local paper, and seeing my name and my words in type was like a mainline hit to the brain, and that's sort of like my first memory of being published. But just to echo what you said, Linda, a little bit about your aunt, I was such a bully kid. Day in and day out for years and years and years. And so reading and writing for me were there were like shelters, like it really was like a cave that I lived in. And in 6th grade, I had a teacher, and I just remember that she wrote, we had these little like mimeographed yearbooks at the end of the year, and she just wrote in it, she wrote, "I expect great literary works from you." And I never forgot, I have never ever forgotten that. And I think that like with teaching, especially when I was teaching 7th and 8th graders, like I just never ever forgot how like if you hear, like if someone, when you're young, an adult looks you in the eye and says like, you have a gift, you can make a life out of this, like that. I mean, it was such an offhand thing that she wrote, you know? I mean, she probably just tossed it off, but that was the little thing that I grabbed onto. So, yeah, it was just always just a comfort, you know? Like I did it, I not only read all the time, I just wrote, you know? Like I started writing novels when I was like 11 or 12, and I'd write 8 pages and then, you know, whatever.
What about inspiration? I was, someone sent me this quote from, I think, with George Balanchine. Was a choreographer for the New York City Ballet. And they said, George, like, where do you get your inspiration? And he says, the union, dear, because I know these dancers have to be out of here by 10 o'clock. So, what is your inspiration? Is it deadlines? Is it other people? What is your, it could be, I guess it could be more than one, but what is your sources of inspiration? How do you get the work done?
How do you get the work done? When you get the work done, that's not the inspiration part. That's the discipline part, right? There ain't no book unless, or there ain't no play unless you sit your ass down and write it. But the inspiration, what makes you stay in the chair, I guess. Well, one, I think I guess I'm inspired by like everything like my like grandparents and ancestors did for me to be able to be a writer. I think it took my grandma a long time to understand that I wasn't, that I am not unemployed. You know, it took a lot of time being like, okay, this is actually a check I got for doing this thing that you think I did for free. Which Tommy Vigo will talk to y'all about on Thursday if you're not currently making money from shit. And yeah, but I guess I'm inspired, the actual work I guess is inspired by people, whatever my latest life's trauma is. Well, I guess, yeah, I'm running out of those, so I guess I'm having to discover. You know, I'm just like, damn, man, I really could use some trauma right now. Right. But no, that's serious. I think like my first 2 books was like a lot of me excavating those traumas in my life. And having to get to this point, I think for the 3rd collection where I can finally start to write from a place of abundance, thinking about what I would love to celebrate instead of what I would love to celebrate despite of something else.
What inspires? I think my cohort is in the middle of this right now, and me. I am always looking for accurate representations or full surround sound representations of the communities from which I come from. And so I do think in the early stages of my writing process, I was inspired by and propelled by a kind of rage, and you can see it in the writing. The thing is shellacked in some like beautiful wordplay, but it's an angry woman who's writing and like smiling like sweet to you in your face, you know? So like, it has been a journey for me to figure out how to take that and wield that anger and nuance it and balance it out with love spaces and find the love spaces that also inspire me. But when I first started out, it was when I was tired of seeing Africans only represented in The Lion King, which I dare any of y'all to tell me where in Africa that musical actually takes place, because I don't know.
It's an African country.
Even if you think you know, you don't know. And so I had to start penning down the people that I saw and that I knew because I was in love with these people and I didn't get to see them. So it was an inspiration for me to see, can I write down my mama? Can I write down my auntie? Is this a valid form of expression? And the answer is yes.
I'm kind of in your same wheelhouse with that. My work, I have to go into communities for a really long time. So like 6 months, 8 months, a year, where I'm writing a story about a group of people or one person. And so I'm really inspired by the stories that they tell me, the responsibility I have to tell the story in a way that honors them, but also tells a bigger story. And I really like that. The last couple of stories, people thought I was from the place where I was. I'm not from New Orleans, I'm not from Jackson, Mississippi, I'm not from Philadelphia, where I've been a whole lot of time, but I just feel like whenever I get blocked a little bit, I just interview some more people, or I do a little bit more research. And then I feel like, ooh, I'm ready to go again. And I think, what I've said, and I'll tell you all tomorrow in more depth, my group, that there's no such thing as writer's block. That doesn't exist, okay? Just, that isn't a thing. But if you feel like you have this thing that doesn't exist, is just do more research. Just go someplace else. Change the environment. Go someplace where you can get a new breath of inspiration. Talk to someone new, and that you'll be fresh again.
When I was 12 and 13 and 14, I picked onions. As a boy, my father would teach us we needed money, and we picked onions. And child labor laws be damned. And I remember I was thinking, going home and taking a shower, and I just reeked of onions, and my skin was sunburned, and I thought to myself, I'm not going to do this with my life. I'm just not going to do this. And I saw how my people were treated, and I'm not going to let people treat me like that. And I've always remembered that. And I've always remembered that my father told me once, you're just like your mother. And it was supposed to be a compliment. And I said, well, I like that. He said, a man is supposed to want to be like his father. And I said, no, Dad, you're not all that nice. I don't want to be like you. And my father he got angry, but because we weren't having an argument, we were talking, he, didn't know quite what to do because he didn't have conversations with his other sons. They just yelled at each other, and I never yelled at him. And then I always remember that because then he said, I want to be, and my mother was very literate and kind and she, likable and all that. And then I remember, and she was a real inspiration to me. But so was my father. I just want to be like him. I mean, he was a terrible father. He was a very good man, and I kind of could make those distinctions. And he said, when I took care of him the last year of his life, and I had been around, he asked me, you put your full name, Benjamin Alire Saenz, and I didn't mind that you used your mother's name. Alire was her name. And I said, but that's the name that was given to me. You both gave me both your names. And I want to be their son. That inspires me. I want to be my parents' son because I belong to people who have helped make this country great and have never been properly thanked. And I would love to shove that down our president's throat. Amen. Because we did, and we have. And I believe that with the words that I write, I want to help make my country great. And I always remember this. When we were small, my mother let us write on the walls of the house. I became a writer and a painter. She gave me wings, I flew.
This is such a big question. What is the question again?
Inspiration, just say what inspired
What
you?
inspired one to become a writer, or what inspires one going forward?
Well, why don't we say going forward, right now?
Right, wow, okay. Well, I mean, like Linda, I'm a journalist, and that's been my bread and butter, mostly about HIV/AIDS, with a lot of LGBTQ stuff that overlaps. And so, you know, I mean, I've been writing about HIV since before I had it, you know, like I actually, I had been writing about it for almost a decade before I was diagnosed myself. And I think especially working at Pause Magazine, the arc of, like with, you know, my 2 novels ago, Christodora, the arc of the story of the epidemic in the United States was, I just felt like so etched into my bones after covering it and writing about it and knowing exactly how it played out year after year, knowing exactly what happened in '87 and '88 and '89. And I was just so, I think, blown away by the story of what activists did. And, you know, I could say mainly ACT UP, but not just ACT UP, how they pushed the ground, you know, how they literally kind of pushed the ground and made a change happen that, you know, for years I would think, this is the most emotional, incredible story of heroism in the face of, you know, a tragedy, and I can't believe it's never been told, like in some narrative form, and it since has, like in addition to my book in other ways, but I just think that that's where, with that book, that's just where it came from. It was like, how would you take this story that on one hand is very wonky, you know, it's a lot about treatment and data and science, and yet there's such a you know, visceral, like emotional side to it. How would you, what would that look like in a novel? You know, and like I always think that like you really need to be obsessed with something if you're gonna write a novel about it, because a novel is a really, really long haul. And you know, like with the newer novel, Correspondence, you know, on one hand, I don't feel like there are that many novels about, I mean, I know you can't tell from my last name that like I'm part Arab, but there really aren't that many novels about like Arabs in the US, and they've actually been here, particularly Syrian Lebanese have been here for over 100 years. So, you know, I think sort of like what you were saying is, well, I wanted to tell a story about my family, you know, the same way that like, say, Jeffrey Eugenides did with like the Greeks in Middlesex. And, you know, and then the other obsession was, don't ask me why, I guess I just gravitate toward really morbid 4-letter things like AIDS or Iraq or whatever, but I was just obsessed, absolutely obsessed with the Iraq War. You know, I could not believe that we did that and just utterly, completely destroyed another country. And then just, you know, out of embarrassment that it, you know, the whole thing was botched, just kind of turned the page and moved on. And even that was even part of Obama's narrative, you know, like I will bring this to a close so we don't have to think about it anymore. And my obsession with what was that war like on the other end? What was it like to be a family on the receiving end of what we did? So, you know, for this book, it was how would I marry those two things? You know, how would I marry a story about long-standing Arab Americans with Arabs halfway around the world? And so then it just became the challenge of like, how do you braid those two things together? What's a plausible way that like those two things might come together in a novel? So, and you know, with this one, it's like I'm always really, I don't have anything against anyone who writes escapist literature, you know. I find it very hard right now to write about anything other than the world and like the moment that we're living in. You know, I just don't get it. I mean, it's weird and surreal to me that, you know, amid this world that we're living in, people are still writing romance, and you know, I think that's fine, but I kind of can't get past like what's happening around us every day, and so that's sort of finding its way into the new book, and maybe things will be really better, like when and if the book comes out in 2 years, but I doubt it, so I think.
Well, I noticed that, you know, at least for 3 panelists, you write a lot about health and HIV. And, you know, we talked about this earlier about how we're in this moment where, you know, HIV has kind of been put in a museum and historicized. Like, okay, that's it, period, HIV is over. But Dinesh, Linda, and Tim, probably through your journalism, you kind of refuse that bell jar aspects of HIV. The epidemic is still going on. How do you navigate that space? And what has the response been as you write about HIV and AIDS now, particularly with Black and brown bodies who are continually being decimated by this disease?
I was like you, Tim. I wrote a story very early on, and I kept thinking, you know, and kept covering it, and in each part, I kept thinking, I can't believe I'm still having to do this, because isn't this over? Isn't it over? Why isn't this over? What's going on? Why is this still around? So in 2016, I got motivated by 2 things. One was that statistic that was talking about how in the future, half of all Black, gay, and bisexual men will be living with HIV if nothing changes. I was like, what? Why? And that was just weird. And then second, I started thinking about it, and I thought, why is that? That's very strange. Why is that still happening, and where is it? And then the statistics were like pointing to Jackson, Mississippi, and I was like, why is this place the place? So that made me curious. But then I also felt a complicity around some of what happened to Black gay men, because when I was at Essence magazine, and even some of my earlier stories for the Times were focused on straight Black women, and that was how you could get published, these stories. And I was like, well, if I write about HIV, it's got to be around this framework, even while some of my Black gay friends were saying, wait, actually, if you look at this, it's really us. And I was just, you know, nobody was kind of like wanting to hear that then. And so I was like, well, we'll get to you, kind of like, but we're Black women. It sounds so weird in this part. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. She goes, were you somehow involved in this? I was like, oh, yes. Weren't you working at Essence then? Yes. So I put the first person in, and some of it is, sometimes people will go, oh, I just really like that part where you talked about yourself. So anyway, long way of saying, yes, still writing about that, and feel like it's still important to tell that story.
Can you repeat the last part of the question?
Like how do you navigate, you know, this kind of feeling, or this, maybe from the pieces I read, that it's like it's always AIDS a look back.
Oh,
or,
right.
Or HIV a look back. It's done like looking back at the epidemic that has ended.
Right, I mean, you know, I think that's a very like white and class perspective that HIV is over, right? You know, so that's my diagnosis. I think we, you know, I mean, I'm trying to figure out what I can add unique to this, because there is this like sort of confluence of stigma and class that falls heavily on Black and brown bodies when it comes to the conversation of HIV. You know, while, you know, where medication is great, there's still a lot of people who don't know where to get tested or if they can get tested, we don't want to get tested. You know, there's so much stigma shame. We can talk about the like still like, you know, the DL idea. What's interesting about you speaking about like sort of the Black women's perspective of HIV, like, because so much was about the famous DL brother, right? Which you can get into a larger conversation about biphobia in the Black community, right? You know, and not allowing those men the space to be their full selves. But you know, for me, who has access to medication and stuff like that, I've been lately thinking about HIV from a class standpoint. I was in between healthcare for a little bit, and made too much money to be on assistance, and so I was coming out like probably $1,200 a month for a little bit for 30 pills to stay on my medication until I was able to like finally get the manufacturer's coupon. I think, oh my God. But you know, you gotta, like, even that runs out after a while. So like HIV, right, it's capital now. Right. If you are not, you know, on the right side of the poverty line, and if you are like me, or like maybe existing outside of a structure where you have dependable health care, shit's expensive. I pay so much money to keep myself alive. Shit, that's half why I'm on tour. I can, do a college gig just to get a month's worth of pills. It's ridiculous. And so there is a new, the epidemic has changed, surely. It's using different weapons, as medication gets better, stigma gets worse. Sometimes, that's what's felt, I think, like from within a Black male perspective. And it's interesting too, because I wonder if people also talk about it from a, in the past tense, because so many of our prolific writers of HIV live with the virus and aren't with us now. I think about Essex Hemphill, I think about Melvin Dixon, so many folks who I looked to as a Black, queer, boy, moves through writer. I didn't have anybody to look to for a long time. There was D.A. Powell, who I thought was Black, but he's not. Who was living and writing about it. But Jericho Brown didn't really start writing about HIV in uncoded ways until his second book. Really the third, I would say. The second book, you really didn't know what you were looking for. You have Elmore Wilson, but he's a little less right. So there's when I came to Don't Call Us Dead, I remember getting this huge reaction. There was when I was touring of people saying, "Thank you for finally bringing us and our personal stories to the conversation, not as a number, but as a human." And I realized there hadn't maybe been that in a while for Black queer poetics. There was nobody really writing about HIV, not from a perspective academic or from other epidemic, but from the personal. And I think maybe that's the way to bring. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I kind of lost right now. Sorry. I write about it because I live it. I'll be writing about it for the rest of my life, and so I don't really know what to say to people who have the privilege to leave it behind, because it's a thing that I will walk with, not always in woe, but I will have to walk with for the rest of my life. So.
More on AIDS. Okay. So the question was, you said that you feel that it's only ever kind of talked about in the past.
I don't say only, but I feel like there's this theme of a backward glance.
Like AIDS happened.
AIDS happened.
Right, yeah. Well, it's so interesting. I mean, this is, writing about HIV/AIDS is my, day in, day out bread and butter. And even in these recent weeks, literally just up until, 3 days before I came here for thebody.com, which is kind of Pause. I don't say they're a rival, it's the other. We're doing this series of conversations with people at HIV/AIDS service agencies around the country, where often some of the staff is positive themselves. So I feel like I've been getting this really, really up-to-date picture of what it looks like. And I think, if just to summarize, the sense that I get is that materially, in terms of access to meds and even access to PrEP, which has changed things in so many ways, it's there. It's there, whether it's through the ADAP, whether it's through Medicaid, or whether it's through the ADAP program, which, if you haven't heard of it, it's sort of the provider of last resort for HIV/AIDS medications, and it is a large provider of HIV care and treatment for low-income people in every single state. And thank God, in this really politically divided time, it is a program that has somewhat remained untouchable, and has just maintained bipartisan support and funding. And a lot of states also use it now to pay for PrEP as well. And then, of course, Gilead, the maker of PrEP, that's a whole separate thing we could unpack.
Forever.
Gilead has a charity program, basically. So, what I see is that, the resources are there to treat it and suppress it or to prevent it. However, going straight to what Linda because we both talked to Dr. Amina and that incredible man in Jackson, Mississippi, it is the fault lines of race and class and all the other drivers like poverty and discrimination and not having transportation and so many other things that create the disparities. There is a much higher uptake of PrEP among middle class, mostly white, gay men than gay men of color, low income. But it really is sort of like a race and class nexus, you know? So the question that I explored in a piece, I think somewhat similar to yours for the Nation, is why? Like if PrEP, which is the HIV prevention pill, is technically available, why is there such a gap between white and black men who are on it? And all of my journalism and all points to all of these other things that are bearing down on you as like a low-income gay black man. You have housing instability, you have employment instability, you have emotional trauma from family separation. And so, at the clinic in Jackson, I think it was, maybe it wasn't, it was at another clinic in the South, they started a study that I thought was so telling. And what they did was, instead of a study to just get this population on PrEP, and just sort of do that in a vacuum, like all we care about is putting you on PrEP, they said, they designed the study so that they intensively, kind of surrounded the participants like with love and said, what else is going on in your life, and that's when they heard, well, I don't really have a real home, well, I don't really have a real job, well, I'm suicidally depressed and like I don't know where to go for it. And so they designed the study to say, we will help you address all of that other stuff. And when they helped the whole person, then they were in a better position to not just only go on PrEP, but to adhere to it. But you couldn't just deal with the HIV factor in a vacuum. Like you had to look at the rest of the person's life because it's these disparities that are driving the gap. It's not that it's very rare when someone has to pay out of pocket for the medications. You couldn't possibly, you'd have to be loaded. I mean, they're a fortune, So it's not about the technical access to the treatment isn't there. It's all the other factors in your life that would prevent you from accessing them.
Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit for the last question, and this is for everyone, and I'm going to turn it over to the room. I always like to ask this question of the panelists. There's an old Leonard Cohen quote where he says, like, every artist has a secret that they're trying to tell in their work. You mind telling me what your secret is?
Always pass it.
I'm
Down there, no, I'm not, no.
People, silence equals death. I am my secret. I am at heart just a dork. And I'm just a dork, and I'm sentimental, and I cry a lot. I cry because I'm happy. I cry because I'm sad. I cry because I wake up in the morning. I have a gift of tears, and so I certainly use that gift. And that's kind of weird to me, that I'm such a dork, because I never was hip, and I didn't want to be. And, I like Johnny Depp, but I never wanted to be him. And so, and I really, and the other thing is that peer pressure just doesn't work on me. Because I really don't want to be anybody else but me. And maybe that sounds a little arrogant, but that's true. So I'm a dork, and I really love my dog, Emma, and she's everything to me, which is really stupid, but well, not really when you consider the men that I dated. Yes, I'm going to shut up now.
So what's the secret in our work, right?
Yeah, like what are you trying, like,
Yeah,
what are you
okay,
working
so
through?
my secret is chlorophyll drops in your water and the vitamin C serum. And washing your face with whatever cleanser you use for a full minute. Yes, a full minute. The secret in my work, let's see, like if like aliens were to come down and like discover like the last library on what's left of Earth and they saw my books, I would hope they would read it and be like, oh, they were having a lot of fun while the world was ending. Because I think that's kind of the line in my poems. It's like, everything is on fire, don't you want to dance? Like, so, yeah.
Okay. So, I don't want to even admit this out loud, but go for it. So I write out of really proving that I'm smarter than everyone else. I'm going to add a little layer to that. So when I first started my first job in magazines, I moved to New York right out of college and had this first job. So I realized the first day no one was really speaking to me because my boss, who I really dislike, told everyone I was an affirmative action hire. Okay? So every article that I get, I think, oh, yay, it's in the New York Times Magazine. She has to read it. Sees that the affirmative action hire is the person who wrote on the cover of this magazine. So unfortunately, this feeling hasn't ended, so I'm super still mad about all this stuff. I'm trying to prove I'm so smart. So I guess it was a couple months ago, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, I forget the man's name, was talking in a public forum at Harvard, and this came on Twitter. So I'm like, why? I never pay attention to my Twitter, but everybody's like, your Twitter's blowing up. People, I'm so old, people like email me and say, hey, look at Twitter. So I go onto Twitter and I was like, why is my name in these lists? Because the editor of The Atlantic, this is a few months ago, said the reason I don't have anyone but white men writing our cover stories in The Atlantic is because I don't know any writers of color or women who can write 10,000 words. So somebody on Twitter started listing all the people, including Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is at The Atlantic. I was on the list. I was so mad. I was mad for days. I had to play with my dog to calm down. I'm not kidding. I was so angry. And I tried to do something on Twitter. I couldn't get it together. I was too mad. So anyway, that's what's behind that feeling, is like kind of rage.
I think it's funny when rage comes from the people who smile and say. Those are the people you need to actually watch out. Which might get to the heart of my work and part of the secret of it, which I'm not sure I should say out loud, but myself. There's a healthy dose of fuck you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I very firmly know who it is I'm writing for, and sometimes it is not for the entire world. So F you if you ask me to explain to the entire world. I don't usually do that. I will, it's a gift that I give for those in my mind to give, and then if you happen to want to eat from that, then please sit down and partake. But I'm not literally going to rip myself up for you, unless I decided to. So, there is a healthy dose of that, which means they are sometimes purposefully complicated. They are not overly, I'm not explaining things for people. I will drop you down in my cosmology and you will have to deal without explanation unless I deem fit which is something in the playwriting world that can get you into a lot of producing trouble.
Yep.
And it is something that I engage because I am keenly aware of who's asked to explain their existence, and whose existences are taken as a right and a reality and a truth, and thus are not questioned. So there is a healthy dose of fuck you between my words. With a smile.
Okay, so this is what's your driver, what's driving you, is that it? It's so interesting with the talk of rage. You know, I guess I feel like I've buried a lot rage toward those boys, you know, like those boys of my youth who and you know, sort of to what you said, I think maybe there's a sort of like, you know, deep down the part of the drive is I'll show them, you know, like, so yeah, I mean, I have a hard time writing straight men. You know, I think there's a rage there toward straight men that includes my father, you know. But there's that, but I think like on the, I guess on the happier side, these questions really make one think and dig, and it's kind of uncomfortable. But, you know, I thought back to, I have like two very vivid memories, and one is, it was like around the holidays, and I was like 13 or 14, and we were reading Great Expectations for school. And I just have this memory of like, it was night, and lying on the couch, and like the tree was up, and just reading Great Expectations, and just feeling the most incredible feeling of like, the lushness and the plushness and like the opulence of the novel, you know, and just wanting to, there's just nothing more delicious than that, you know, like when you're deep in that incredible book, you know, that is just, you know, moving you so deeply, and just wanting to do that, you know, I mean, for me in some ways, like writing and reading feel the same, you know, like when you're in that really plush space where you just feel like you're really deep in the richness of it, you know, and then the other was, I remember it was a study hall, and it was like right, I don't know why these are all like Yuletide, but it was like right before the holiday break, and I loved the breaks, because that meant that it meant I wouldn't get the shit kicked out of me for a week or two, and I would just be with my family and with my cousins, and I'd be safe. But reading, what's it called? A Christmas Memory by Truman Capote. And just something about, I didn't even know he was gay, you know, but there's like such an intense queerness to that story, right? It's about like that weird old lady and the little boy, and how like they spend all their time together making ginger snaps or whatever, you know? But just feeling so warm, I guess, like just so warm inside, you know, like reading that, just feeling so right and so at home. And in a way, it's almost like chasing that feeling forever, you know? Like that's sort of the drug of novels or of literature, and just chasing it just because it feels good, I guess. So.
But, you know, that kind of rage is also kind of beauty to it. I mean, one of my you know, literary heroes is James Baldwin. And he can make rage sound so beautiful and so elegant that who wouldn't want to write like that, you know? And so like, you know, rage is necessary, but it's not necessarily destructive, and it isn't that cliche thing that it's not that fuck you thing, you know, necessarily, I don't think, because I think it's really, because it comes out of love. It comes out of real love and passion for the beauty that we want to see in the world, you know. It's like, you know, I think a lot of people don't, you know, I have a company called Benjamin Inc., and one of our t-shirts we're about to come out with, it says, when exactly did you decide to be a heterosexual? You know, because we, you know, it's like, we're people, and what do they, people say the gays, you know, what do they want? You know, like, because they don't see us as human beings, and we are, and that's what kind of makes you angry. But then I think, you know, gay people are better human beings than heterosexuals, and, we didn't fuck up the world, they did, So we should have a turn at it anyway. We should have our turn at fucking it up, like, I say put us in charge, so.
That's your campaign platform. Okay, we have time for two questions, and then we're gonna have drinks in the back. So we have 2 quick questions from.
Yeah. I guess it's a general question, just because I want to get as much from you guys as I can. What's something that you think is important for us as emerging writers who are wanting to be in the professional space? What are the things that we need to be keeping in mind as we move forward? Because it's a very complicated space. I know, and in our own private talks, we've been talking about what it means to step into the professional realm and what happens next. And what are some thoughts that you have for us? What are the things we need to keep an eye out for? And what are those very real steps that we should be doing next?
You talk first for once.
All right, thanks. That's such a big question. I mean, I tried to start formulating the answer as you were asking it. I think one thing is don't just continue to prioritize and carve out the space for your practice. I mean, I think it's writing regularly is the easiest thing to slip away from. Just life and other things intervene. So I think, one thing is just I hate this term holding space because I feel like I hear all the time, but hold that space, for yourself, whatever it takes. And I sort of agree with what Linda said, but just put the writer's block thing aside, make yourself write. Not every day, but most days, I try to start the day, before I go into deadlines and emails and all of that stuff, I try to start the day by creative writing for, even if it's just literally 40 minutes before I poop out and I suddenly look at an email or something and then the creative train of thought is gone. Just try to block out that time, whenever you do it and really hold to it. And I think on the more professional end of what you asked, were you sort of saying were you kind of how do you get an agent or how do you get a producer? Is that kind of what you were like?
I guess what I'm talking about, especially for people of color, is that the literary world is primarily white, and it's a lot of us having to make decisions about where are we going to be comfortable, where are we going to feel heard, where are we going to be able to move through this space confidently, and what are some things that we should keep in mind when making those decisions, whether or not to follow a job or to follow applying to certain places as far as publication goes. What are the things that we need to keep in mind?
Well, the only thing that ever worked for me, I was not much for the, apply to Yaddo and, whatever those writing workshops are, when you go and you do the professional thing and you meet people and you kind of network. And, I kind of never went to any of those things because I thought that if you need to have an affair, that's where you go, but I can stay home and have an affair, so I thought, I just wrote. I didn't network. I just wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I think I wrote myself into being a good writer. And if you're really, really, really good, then they can't ignore you. No one can. And I really believe that. So if you just become the best writer you can be, and then push yourself and become even a better writer than that, no one's going to be able to ignore you. And I believe that.
Can I pop in a really quick practical thing that's speaking to, for anyone who doesn't have an agent, right? Here's one trick or pro tip or whatever to keep in mind. If you're looking for an agent, go find the books that you love by writers of color or writers that you feel are kind of sort of in the same universe that you're writing in, right? Go to the acknowledgments page, find out who the agent was. Sometimes they won't say my agent, they'll just say, I really want to thank Susan Smith, and with a little creative Googling you can figure out that, and reach out to those agents, you know? And, you know, and it doesn't hurt to say, I know that you agented, you know, book X or book Y, which I absolutely love, and I think that my pages bear some commonality with that, and I'd love, you know, I just think that way you're sort of navigating yourself toward agents who, you know, to your point, who already kind of love and want to promote, you know, a particular universe or community of literature. So that's just a little backdoor tip.
I'm just going to sneak in a little bit thing to say too is there's a network of people and support. There's not a lot of us, but we are out here. Reach out to those people who you know are doing the thing, because it's not easy.
Yeah.
So, but there is a small group of support. I don't even say small, there's a constellation of support. And you just have to kind of map it. Ask me after and I'll tell you some stuff.
And you know, and some writers, you know, who are higher up or whatever are generous and some aren't. So, you know, love and thank and cultivate the ones who are and move on. Like don't get, you know, if you like to William's point, if like you reach out and you don't get, because I mean I've heard some stories of some like writers quite higher up being quite shady. If you get that, just move on. You know, like find and stick with and cultivate the people who will lift you up and who will really help you and who will really nurture you, and don't stress over the others.
I'm gonna speak primarily as a playwright, which I know doesn't help everybody, but if there is something to it that does help, please snatch it, and probably in a multi-tiered way. So excuse what might become a delightful ramble. I'm hoping it will all cohere at some point. When I first started out, I had to negotiate my relationship to practice, which is was very difficult for me. Coming out 2009 in the recession, being an actress who actually plays sweet, but was told most of the time when I was singing, can you sing Effie? I was like, no, I can sing Christine in Phantom of the Opera. I can't do what you asked me. So that meant negotiating how to carve 4 to 5 hours a day to write while negotiating my job, which was all gigs, and took up most of my life. So I'm not certain who I was because of the fever state I was putting myself in order to create while still live and eat, which is an actual reality for a lot of us.
Right.
So there's that part of it. And then there was the administrative part, which nobody told me about. And that part of it I was sorely bad at, but had to get just as good at that as the writing part of it, for me specifically. So that was keeping an Excel sheet of all the applications and all the residencies that I was applying for, actively seeking it out and dedicating an hour or 2 a day to flood the field.
Right.
And I chose the method of flooding the field. At my peak, I think I was doing 15 to 20 applications a month.
Oh my God!
My reason for doing that was because I didn't exist. I didn't know where I existed yet. I could find myself in narrative, I could find myself in poetry, I couldn't find myself in playwriting. So I was illogical to some. So I needed to find the places that would respond to me, and when I looked at their seasons, they never had a me. So how did I negotiate that? The way I did it was I flooded the field. And then it's like once in a blue moon I get something back. And then that opens the next can of worms. How do you take that one thing that you got and maximize that into other things? So I learned quite quickly, what does it mean to assimilate a note? How do I gracefully say yes or no to something that might be dismantling my work and making it look like what they did last season? How do I negotiate that? And so that was a trial and error. Sometimes I burn too hot, sometimes I burn too cold. And I can't tell you how to do it, but what I wish I did, which I did not do, was I wish that I had called somebody. I had some friends that I potentially could have called. I could have called the Dominique Morisseau. I could have called, I love the work of Rada Blank, and I'm sure if she got an email from me, she would have been like, hey girl, this is what's up. I could have called somebody. So also knowing once you get into those spaces, you are not alone in those spaces, even though you might feel alone because nobody looks like you. There is somebody that has done it before, and that is the great lie, to make you feel as if you are the first and the only. You are not the first and the only. I wish I had picked up a phone and called more people. That would have helped me navigate spaces without burning too hot or too cold. Because there have been times where I have killed a play because I assimilated all the notes and then produced it, didn't know who the hell wrote it. And then there were other times that I should have actually taken a note into consideration, but I was bucking too hard. So, friends would have been my friend. And that is what I know to say about what it is to navigate those spaces, is it is a false assumption to believe that you are by yourself. You are not, whether or not you see yourself or not.
And add on to that. And at some point you do feel like, oh, there was this article a few years ago, it was called The Incredible Whiteness of Publishing. And it really stuck with you. It's like, oh yeah, that is a thing, that's a thing. And then it was like, no it isn't. We are there. We don't always know each other. So a few years ago, some of us started this party called the Black Pack in New York. So we meet twice a year. Anybody can come. I'll make sure that I give you the invitation for those of you who are black. So anyway, the Black Pack is Black people in publishing. So we have this party twice a year. And so then it started out small, then people kept telling other people, and then I said, we need to photograph ourselves because we need to show, because there's still this idea that, oh, there's not anybody in publishing behind the scenes, out front, who's black. So we got this wonderful photographer who does a lot of sort of black parties and with black authors. So she stood up on a ladder we all stood outside in Harlem to sort of make Great Day in Harlem, that photo, that wonderful photo. So she shot us from above. And the first year it was like however many, it was like, I don't know, 50. Then it was 75. People kept, the last time it was 200, we outgrew the space. The other thing is, you are here because we already know you're talented. Okay, that hard work piece that we talked about, that's real. You have to do it, you have to sacrifice, you have to want it. You have to have the courage to believe in your talent and your hard work and put it out there. And the other thing is you have to stay in contact with each other and mentor. That is, you can reach higher and try to get somebody to help you, but it's actually the people here who will be very useful to you. I had been away from the Times for a few years, and I had Jacqueline Woodson, my best friend, said, oh, I'm invited to a party where you have to bring another woman, journalist, writer, author, or editor, and I want you to be my +1. So I went, and that's how I got my first New York Times Magazine story, because I was the +1, and then I met my future editor. So then the next year, I brought a couple people, and one of the people I brought one year was Sarah Broom. So Sarah Broom, if you don't know her, her new novel is The Yellow House. It was reviewed in the Times today. On Sunday, it's the front page, the cover of the New York Times Book Review. So she, so it helped. And she called me and she said, oh my God, this is taking off. It's got a life of its own. It's beyond me. It's outside me. Yourself. It's not beyond you. It is yours. Pull it together. It's happening. This is what you wanted. Let it go with it. So, I mean, I don't, whether you call it each one teach one, lift as you climb, whatever it is, stay in contact with each other and help each other, because that's important. Oh, sorry.
I really don't have a whole lot to add. I do want to echo Flood the Market. You know, as much as I like to believe that all great work will eventually be recognized and rewarded, the great writer who is scared to send out their work is not going to get recognized or as far as the maybe not as great writer who is brave and not scared of a no. I for a long time had like a very hard practice of like apply to literally everything I'm eligible for. It doesn't take that much. A lot of that grunt work you do up front, you write a cover letter that kind of works for the season. You make your packet that works for the season. It's not always restarting the wheel. Some of those things are unique. Most applications are damn near the same application. So get your materials together and have a season. It doesn't take that much work. It sometimes is more of a hill. It looks like a mountain from a distance when you walk up to it. It's sometimes just a hill. Let's see. I want to echo that there is no such thing as writer's block, but I do want to support time away from writing because I do not believe that just to keep on turning page after page after page when you are in that moment of what we sometimes recognize or call writer's block is the best thing to do. Time spent living and absorbing and going to therapy and doing all the other things that you need to do is also part of that writing process as well. So sometimes you have to step away so you can come back to the writing fuller or inspired. It's no use staying at the page if your well is empty. So go take care of yourself sometimes if you feel that tank. I also want to support or echo lateral support with you and your peers. If you do not already have at least a handful of folks that you can say are your writing community, change that quickly. Don't be shy, get to know folks here at this retreat, that's how it happens. As grateful as I am for my mentors and my ancestors, some of the most important help or advice I've got were from people that were the same age and as much try to figure it out as me. And that kind of skill sharing is what's gonna happen. Part of my community named that, like as the Dark Noise Collective. And really all we do is intentionally love upon and support each other. And that love like gets noticed. Like, I don't know, like we just try to think about what little power do we all have together that we can scrap together into a bigger power. And you know, circles rise together, you know, like that entire collective, not all at the same time, but we are all at a very different stage in our career than when we started out. And a big part of that has been support and love and skill sharing and you know, just even like the braveness to go into a space that is antagonized and say this is mine, and also the permission to say this space ain't for me, and I'm gonna actually go. To this question of professional, I interrogate you to ask yourself, what does professional mean to you as a writer? And to develop a couple different kinds of like goals that are gonna keep you being happy. If you are only gonna be happy with a tenure track job and a 6-figure advance, then maybe this isn't the career for you. You know, if there is a reason for the work outside of that material need, then that's where you find happiness, and hopefully that material needs to come, and then hopefully, you know, on Thursday with time we're gonna talk about how to manipulate that into actual material, right? For every writer of the room, unless you're a playwright who is gonna be watching from the audience, you need to know how to become a better reader of your work, having a personality, or just really like being able to read your work like you care about it is going to be a difference between you go into a place and you know having folks not remember your name and go into a place and having nobody know you before you walk in. You give a convincing reading, you got everybody lined up, your book is sold out, at least at that reading, and that spreads the word. So become as enthusiastic about your work in the air as you are on the page. Anything else? Don't believe the zero-sum game. You know, you can only stand to gain from supporting your community near and far. So please don't be out here looking like a hater. You know, but also, you know, like call out the bullshit when bullshit needs to be called out. But another writer eating is not something off of your plate. Support them. And like that runs back to, I guess, the top, and that's why I end. Like just become, like when you go back home, if you are not already part of your local writing community, be a part of it. Figure out where the writing scene is, wherever you're at, if you're lucky enough to live in a place with a writing scene, or some type of writing community. Because when you do start popping off, those, or you know, that's going to be the folks who support you first. And I think it is sort of BS to like show up to the writing community and then just ask for things if you are not already a part of that community and feeding back. So yeah, be part of the community. That's it.
Okay, I actually think that's our time. Yeah.